Does God exist? Well, when you reject the obvious and insert your feelings, it might seem that way, so long as you don't think about it too hard. But that's a really idiotic way to go through life, isn't it? I came across this video by the London Gap that wants us to believe that God exists. He claims that atheists are rejecting the obvious, but only if you define obvious as things that are carefully theologically picked and ignoring all the really obvious things out there. I don't get how people can be this blind to their own biases, but we see it all the time. So I guess I have to accept that it happens, even though I don't get it. What is wrong with these people? Oh well, let's take a look and see which side is really rejecting the obvious.
Can a building build itself?
No, but nobody pretends that it did. We also don't pretend that the universe built itself. No one but the religious throw out that chestnut of irrationality and don't stop to consider just how ridiculous it is. So, you're not off to a good start, pal.
If we're talking about the existence of God, according to the Bible, God exists.
Who cares what the Bible says? According to the teachings of Scientology, Xenu exists. That doesn't make it so. And why would we care what the Bible says anyway? It's a book of ancient mythology that has no evidence to support it. So your statement is entirely meaningless.
The Bible even goes further to say that it's foolish to deny it.
Good for it. Again, doesn't mean a damn thing. I can say it's foolish to deny the flying spaghetti monster. Do you care? Didn't think so.
And that's because a building speaks of a builder. And this wonderful world bears witness to a wonderful creator.
Entirely untrue. In fact, it isn't us that have to reject reality. It's you. Because the real world that we actually live in doesn't support your religious claims about a creator. It shows very clearly that everything came about naturally, and there's no evidence of any kind for anything beyond that. Just because you want it to be true doesn't mean that it is. You actually have to prove it. Why don't you get on that?
So much so that to deny that a creator exists, you have to reject the obvious. You have to reject the logical implications of all that we see around us. Let's talk logic for a moment. Does this universe exist? Sane people will typically accept that something exists.
Now, I will agree with that. The universe objectively exists. We can experience it individually and collectively and come to common conclusions about what constitutes the universe, how it operates, and what its likely origins might have been. Now, why do I have the feeling he's about to take a hard left at Albuquerque and say something that no rational person ever would? Let's see.
And to suggest that a building or even this whole universe is an illusion is the stuff of science fiction, and it's kind of a dead end to any serious discussion. But if you'll accept that the universe exists, there are only two possibilities.
Ah, a false dichotomy. Irrational screed incoming.
Does it exist in and of itself, that is, it's self-existent, or was it created by something or someone else? I guess you could add a third option and say that it created itself.
That is logically impossible, because in order to create itself, it would have had to have existed before it existed. Now certainly, the universe could have been created, and I use that word hesitantly, by something that existed before the universe, but you notice that this guy was very vague in what he wants to think created the universe. It might have been created by something. Not his God, something. But the second anyone accepts that premise, he will just assume that his God did it, without ever bothering to prove it. We're not rejecting the obvious, we're recognizing it.
But that's no good as an idea. Buildings don't just build themselves, and materials don't just appear. And beyond that, in terms of logic, to create itself, it would have to exist before it existed. It would have to exist and not exist at the same time.
Which is why it's a stupid idea that no one considers, except the religious who trot it out as a straw man. So if it's silly, why did you bring it up?
There was a great Christian thinker, R.C. Sproul, who said that as far as logic goes, that's formally absurd.
So is believing in an imaginary father figure in the sky, but that doesn't stop you from doing it. If we're going to stick with logic here, which I wholeheartedly recommend for as long as we can, then your entire theological position must be rejected out of hand.
And so it doesn't exactly commend itself as a sensible third option. So which is it? Is the universe eternal and self-existent? Did it never have a beginning? Or was it created?
Or it was generated through completely naturalistic means without the need for a creator. That's the third option that the religious don't want to consider, but it is the option that 100% of the evidence points to. And that's why this is such an absurd false dichotomy, because he's only talking about two options that they made up out of whole cloth, arbitrarily dismissing one of them, and then declaring that this creator, whatever that is, has to be their and only their God. And then they pretend to be logical. Sorry, but no.
Scientifically, everything about the universe that we can test and observe and examine points back to a beginning.
But it doesn't point to a creator. It points to a purely naturalistic origin, certainly not anything supernatural. The religious can't even define what the supernatural is, much less how they purport to know anything about it. So if we're going to stick with logic, this guy hasn't remotely made his case. In fact, he's just proven himself to be either tremendously shallow or absurdly dishonest.
And so it's really just speculation. If you want to suggest that the universe is eternal and self-existent, you have to speculate beyond what looks like a beginning.
Or you just go where the evidence leads, recognize that the universe we live in had a beginning, that the beginning looks entirely natural, even though we don't know a lot of the specific details, and then we go on from there. What we don't have to do is make up a bunch of emotionally comforting nonsense to attach to a perfectly natural event because it makes some people feel better. That's just stupid.
And no matter how you dress that up, it's not science.
No, what you're doing is not science. It's religious fantasy. It's mindless wishful thinking done because either you don't understand the way science works, or reality makes you sad. Again, pure stupidity.
But if you'll accept that everything that we can see points back to a beginning, if matter itself had a beginning, and it didn't create itself, who created it?
And there's your unwarranted assumption. Who? Who created it? Not what. Who? But again, this isn't about finding the truth. It's about pushing a specific religious narrative. And that's not how science, indeed, not how any credible philosophical position operates. But they have no credibility, do they?
According to the Bible, the answer to that question is God.
So what? According to Atenism, Aten did it. According to Sikhism, it was Wahaguru. In Hinduism, it's arguably Brahma. In traditional Chinese mythology, Pangu created the universe. According to Kazakh folktales, it was Jasagnan. There are tons and tons of supposed creator gods from lots of different religious traditions. Why should we give a damn about the Bible?
First verse of the Bible claims that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's it. According to the Bible, God doesn't even start by explaining his own existence. He merely asserts himself and inserts himself into our existence as the one who made everything.
You haven't read much mythology, have you? Oh, wait, no. You've only read mythology, just your own. But if you had read a lot of mythology, you'd know that very few religions try to justify the existence of their gods. Their gods are just there, doing whatever they're doing, with no real explanation in sight. But this is what happens when you've got your nose in one and only one book, and you couldn't care less about reality.
And that's what makes finding out about God so important. According to the Bible, this creation declares the glory of God. It tells us a lot about Him. We all know something of His eternal power and divine nature from the things that have been made.
Who cares? Because we know nothing of the sort. You're making unsupported and unproven assertions based on your emotional comfort and wishful thinking, not evidence, not logic, not reason. Feelings. And because your feelings are so much more important to you than the facts, you present arguments as though they're proven when they're anything but. You want it to be true, but you haven't gone through any of the rational steps to prove that it is. This is why the religious fail so miserably in rational discussions and debates.
And it's all so obvious that it leaves us all without excuse.
It's only obvious to people engaged in absurd levels of confirmation bias, people for whom feelings are the sole arbiter of what they ought to allow into their heads. And people like that shouldn't be proud of their actions. They really ought to be ashamed.
Thankfully, the God who made us has also revealed Himself to us in the Bible. And so the urgent questions become, who is this God? And what is God like?
You can't tell us because you've defined God as being absolutely, objectively indefensible. There is no way anyone, including the most ardent believer, can objectively examine God to find out what He's like, or even if He exists. And you can't point to the Bible because how would you know that anyone writing the Bible knew any more about it than you do? God inspired them? How do you know? That's just an unsupported claim, and unsupported claims don't mean anything. Faith? Well, every religion has faith. If you don't think that the faith of the Hindu or the Buddhist or the Muslim means anything, then why should you get a pass? You have done nothing but shoot yourself in the foot with your crazy beliefs, and now you want us to take you seriously. I think not. I mean, seriously, are they making these videos to be laughed at? Do they think that anyone is going to take them seriously who doesn't already fall for their load of religious nonsense? Because a halfway smart child could see through the absurdity of these claims and empty arguments without batting an eye. This isn't high-level graduate degree philosophy. This is, are you kidding me? I learned this stuff in grade school crap. Why the religious didn't learn it too, I have no idea, but they have no capacity to step back from their beliefs and evaluate whether or not they make any sense. But as I keep saying, this is about the feels, not about the reals. It doesn't matter to them one way or the other, so long as they get a feeling of emotional comfort and spiritual superiority out of it. Whether it makes sense, well, that's not important. They get what they want to out of it. They get that dose of dopamine, and they don't have to think about it or much of anything else very hard. That's why they do it, and they don't even know that's why they do it. That's the really sad part. They're delusional, and they don't know it. They don't want to know it. Reality just doesn't make a difference. And there's something seriously wrong with anyone who goes through life like that. But that's not a surprise, is it?